The Lion in His Attic. Before the quake, it had been called Castle Minterel, but almost nobody outside of Minterel remembered that. Small events drown in large ones. Atlantis itself, an entire continent, had drowned in the tectonic event that sank this small peninsula. For 70 years, the seat of government had been at Biche, and that place was called Castle Minterel. Outsiders called this drowned place Nihilel's Castle, for its last lord, if they remembered it all. 3 and a fraction stories of what had been the South Tower still stood above the waves. They bore a third name now, Lion's Attic. The sea was choppy today. Durally squinted against bright sunlight glinting off waves. Nothing of Nihilel's castle showed beneath the froth. The lovely golden-haired woman ceased peering over the side of the boat. She lifted her eyes to watch the South Tower come toward them. She murmured into Karsken's ear, "And that's all that's left." Thone was out of earshot, busy lowering the sails, but he might glance back. The boy was not likely to have seen a lovelier woman in his life, and as far as Thone was concerned, his passengers were seeing this place for the first time. Karsken turned to look at Durally, and was relieved. She looked interested, eager, even charmed. But she sounded shaken. "It's all gone. Tapestries and banquet hall and bedrooms and the big ballroom. The gardens. All down there with the fishes, and not even mer people to enjoy them. That little knob of rock must have been Crown Hill. Oh, Karsken, I wish you could have seen it." She shuddered, though her face still wore the mask of eager interest. "Maybe the riding birds survived. Nihilel kept them on the roof." "You couldn't have been more than 10? How can you remember so much?" A shrug. "After the Tarovan invasion, after we had to get out, Mother talked incessantly about palace life. I think she got lost in the past. I don't blame her much, considering what the present was like. What she told me, and what I saw myself, it's all a little mixed up after so long. I saw the traveling eye, though." "How'd that happen?" "Mother was there when a messenger passed it to the king. She snatched it out of his hand, playfully, you know, and admired it and showed it to me. Maybe she thought he'd give it to her. He got very angry, and he was trying not to show it, and that was even more frightening. We left the palace the next day, 12 days before the quake." Karsken asked, "What about the other?" But warning pressure from her hand cut him off. Thone had finished rolling up the sail. As the boat thumped against the stone wall, he sprang upward onto what had been a balcony, and moored the bowline fast. A girl in her teens came from within the tower to fasten the stern line for him. She was big as Thone was big, not yet fat, but hefty, rounded of feature. Thone's sister, Karsken thought, a year or 2 older. Durally, seeing no easier way out of the boat, reached hands up to them. They heaved as she jumped. Karsken passed their luggage up and joined them, leaving the cargo for others to move. Thone made introductions. "Sir Karsken, Lady Durally. This is Estrail, my sister. Estrail, they'll be our guests for a month. I'll have to tell Father. We bring red meat in trade." The girl said, "Oh, very good. Father will love that. How was the trip?" "Well enough. Sometimes the spells for wind just don't do anything. Then there's no telling where you wind up." To Karsken and Durally he said, "We live on this floor. These outside stairs take you right up past us. You'll be staying on the floor above. The top floor is the restaurant." Durally asked, "And the roof?" "It's flat, very convenient. We raise rabbits and poultry there." Thone didn't see the look that passed across Durley's face. "Shall I show you to your rooms? And then I'll have to speak to Father." Nihil's castle dated from the last days of real magic. The south tower was a wide, cylindrical structure 12 stories tall, with several rooms on each floor. In this age, nobody would have tried to build anything so ambitious. When Lion petitioned for the right to occupy these ruins, he had already done so. Perhaps the idea amused Minterel's new rulers. A restaurant in Nihil's castle, reached only by boats. At any rate, nobody else wanted the probably haunted tower. The restaurant was on the top floor. The floor below would serve as an inn, but as custom decreed that the main meal was served at noon, it was rare for guests to stay over. Lion and his wife and 8 children lived on the 3rd floor down. Though Lion's attic was gaining some reputation on the mainland, the majority of Lion's guests were fishermen. They often paid their score in fish or in smuggled wines, so it was that Thone found Lion and Merle hauling in lines through the big kitchen window. Even Lion looked small next to Merle. Merle was 2.5 yards tall and rounded everywhere, with no corners and no indentations. His chin curved in one graceful sweep down to his wishbone. His torso expanded around him like a tethered balloon. There was just enough solidity, enough muscle in the fat, so that none of it sagged at all. And that was considerable muscle. The flat-topped fish they were wrestling through the window was as big as a normal man. But Merle and Lion handled it easily. They settled the corpse on its side on the center table, and Merle asked, "Don't you wish you had an oven that size?" "I do," said Lion. "What is it?" "Dwarf island fish. See the frilly spines all over the top of the thing? Meant to be trees. Moor at an island. Go ashore. When you're all settled, the island dives under you, then snaps the crew up one by one while you're trying to swim. But they're magical, these fish, and with the magic dying away, I'm wondering how to cook the beast." That really wasn't Merle's department, but he was willing to advise. "Low heat in an oven for a long time, maybe 1/8 of an arc," meaning 1/8 of the sun's path from horizon to horizon. Lion nodded. "Low heat, covered. I'll fillet it first. I can fill up a sauce, but I'll have to see how fatty the meat is. All right, Merle. 6 meals in trade. Anyone else could have a dozen, but you—" Merle nodded placidly. He never argued price. "I'll start now." He went through into the restaurant section, scraping the door on both sides, and Lion turned to greet his son. "We have guests," said Thone, "and we have red meat, and we have a bigger boat. I thought it proper to bargain for you." "Guests? Good. Red meat, good. What have you committed me to?" "Let me tell you the way of it." Thone was not used to making business judgments in his father's name. He looked down at his hands and said, "Most of the gold you gave me I had spent. I had spices and dried meat and vegetables and pickle and the rest. Then a boat pulled in with sides of ox for sale. I was wondering what I could sell to buy some of that beef, when these 2 found me at the dock." "Was it you they were looking for?" "I think so. The Lady Durley is of the old Minterel nobility, judging by her accent. Karskin speaks Minterel, but he may be of the new nobility, the invaders from Torov. Odd to find them together." "You didn't trust them? Why did you deal with them?" Thone smiled. "Their offer. The fame of Lion's attic has spread throughout Minterel, so they say. They want a place to honeymoon. They had married that same day. For 2 weeks' stay they offered, well, enough to buy 4 sides of ox, and enough left over to trade Strandhugger in on a larger boat. Large enough for the beef and 2 extra passengers." "Where are they now? And where's the beef?" "I told— It's still aboard." The Lion roared. "Arilta!" "I meant to tell Estrail to do something about that, but it—" "Never mind. You done well." Arilta came hurrying from the restaurant area. Lion's wife resembled her husband to some extent, big-boned, heavy, placid of disposition, carrying her weight well. "What is it?"
"Set the boys to unloading the new boat. 4 sides of beef. Get those into the meat box fast. They can take their time with the other goods."
She left, calling loudly for the boys. Lion said,
"The guests?"
"I gave them the 2 leeward rooms as a suite."
"Good. Why don't you tell them dinner is being served, and then you can have your own meal."
The dining hall was a roar of voices, but when Lion's guests appeared the noise dropped markedly. Both were wearing court dress of a style that had not yet reached the provinces. The man was imposing in black and silver with a figured silver patch over his right eye. The lady was eerily beautiful, dressed in flowing sea green and a centimeter taller than her escort. They were conversation stoppers, and they knew it. And then a man came hurrying to greet them, clapping his hands in delight.
"Lady Durley, Lord Carskin? I am Lion. Are your quarters comfortable? Most of the middle floor is empty. We can offer a variety of choices."
"Quite comfortable, thank you," Carskin said. Lion had taken him by surprise. Rumor said that he was what his name implied, a were-lion. He was large, and his short reddish-blonde hair might be the color of a lion's mane, but Lion was balding on top and smooth-shaven, and well-fed with a round and happy face. He looked far from ferocious.
"Lion, bring 'em here."
Lion looked around, disconcerted.
"I have an empty table in the corner, but if you would prefer Merle's company—"
The man who had called was tremendous. The huge platter before him bore an entire swordfish fillet. Durley stared in what might have been awe or admiration. "Merle, by all means. And can you be persuaded to join us, Lion?"
"I would be delighted."
Lion escorted them to the huge man's table and seated them.
"The swordfish is good." "The swordfish is wonderful,"
Merle boomed. He made amazing progress with the half-swordfish while they were approaching.
"It's baked with apricots and slivered nuts and something else I can't tell. Lion?" "The nuts are soaked in a liqueur called brosa from Rheinaldison and dried in the oven."
"I'll try it," Carskin said, and Durley nodded. Lion disappeared into the kitchen. The noise level was rising toward its previous pitch. Durley raised her voice just high enough. "Most of you seem to be fishers. It must have been hard for you after the mer people went away."
"It was, lady. They had to learn to catch their own fish instead of trading. All the techniques had to be invented from scratch. They tell me they tried magic at first, to breathe water, you know. Some of them drowned. Then came fishing spears and special boats and nets."
"You said they?"
"I'm a whale," said Merle. "I came later."
"Oh, there aren't many werfolk around these days, anywhere."
"We aren't all gone,"
Merle said, while Carskin smiled at how easily they had broached the subject.
"The mer people went away all right, but it wasn't just because they're magical creatures. Their lifestyles include a lot of magic. Whales don't practice much magic."
"Even so," Carskin wondered, "what are you doing on land? Aren't you afraid you might, change? Magic isn't dependable anymore."
"But Lion is. Lion would get me out in time. Anyway, I spend most of my time aboard shrimp. See, if the change comes over me there, it's no problem. A whale's weight would swamp my little boat and leave me floating."
"I still don't see."
"Sharks."
"Ah."
"Damn brainless, toothy, wandering weapons. The more you kill, the more the blood draws more, till—"
Merle shifted restlessly.
"Anyway, there are no sharks ashore, and there are books and people to talk to. Out on the sea there's only the singing. Now, I like the singing, who wouldn't? but it's only family gossip and weather patterns and shoreline changes and where are the fish.
That sounds useful.
Sure it is. Fisherfolk learn the whale songs to find out where the fish are. But for any kind of intelligent conversation, you have to come ashore. Ah, here's Lion.
Lion set 3 plates in place, bearing generous slabs of swordfish and vegetables cooked in elaborate fashions.
What's under discussion?
Were creatures, Karskin said. They're having a terrible time of it almost everywhere. Lion sat down.
Even in Rhinoldison, the wolf people sector?
Well, Durley said uncomfortably, they're changing. You know there are people who can change into animals, but that's because there are werfolk among their ancestors. Most werfolk are animals who learned how to take human form. The human shape has magic in it, you know. Lion nodded, and she continued. In places where the magic's gone, it's terrible. The animals lose their minds. Even human folk with some animal ancestry, they can't make the change, but their minds aren't quite human either. Wolf ancestry makes for good soldiers, but it's hard for them to stop. A touch of hyena or raccoon makes for thieves. A man with a touch of lion makes a good general, but— Merle shifted restlessly as if the subject were painful to him. His platter was quite clean now.
Oh, to hell with the problems of werfolk. Tell me how you lost your eye.
Karskin jumped, but he answered. Happened in the baths when I was 13. We were having a fight with wet towels, and one of my half-brothers flicked my eye out with the corner of a towel. Dull story.
You should make up a better one. Want some help?
Karskin shook his head, smiling despite himself.
Where are you from?
Inland. It's been years since I tasted fresh fish. You were right. It's wonderful. He paused, but the silence forced him to continue. I'm half Torvin, half Mintrel. Duke Chamel of Conth made me his librarian, and I teach his legitimate children. Lady Durley descends from the old Mintrel nobility. She's one of Duchess Chamel's ladies-in-waiting. That's how we met.
I never understood shoreside politics, Merle said. There was a war, wasn't there? Long ago?
Karskin answered for fear that Durley would. Torov invaded after the quake. It was an obvious power vacuum. I gathered the armies never got this far south. What was left of the dukes surrendered first. You'll find a good many of the old Mintrels hereabouts. The Torovans have to go in packs. Merle was looking disgusted.
Whales don't play at war.
It's not a game, Karskin said. Lion added,
Or at least the stakes are too high for ordinary people.
There was murky darkness, black with a hint of green. Blocky shapes. Motion flicked past, drifted back more slowly. Too dark to see, but Karskin sensed something looking back at him. A fish? A ghost? Karskin opened his good eye. Durley was at the window looking out to sea. Leftward, waves washed the spike of island that had been Crown Hill. There was grass almost to the top, Durley said, but the peak was always a bare knob. We picnicked there once, the whole family. What else do you remember? Anything we can use? 2 flights of stairs, Durley said. You've seen the one that winds up the outside of the tower like a snake. Snake-headed it used to be, but the quake must have knocked off the head. Animated? No, just a big carving. It could have been animated once. The magic was going out of everything. The mer people were all gone. The mainlanders were trying to learn to catch their own fish, and we had trouble getting food. Nihilel was thinking of moving the whole court to Bish. Am I rambling too much, darling? No, telling what we can use. Keep it up. The inside stairs lead down from the kitchen, through the laundry room on this floor, and through Thone's room on the lower floor. Thone. Karskin's hand strayed to his belt buckle, which was silver and massive, which was in fact the hilt of a concealed dagger. He's not as big as Lion, but I'd hate to have him angry with me. They're all too big. We'd best not be caught, unless we, or you, can find a legitimate reason for being in Thone's room. Durley scowled. He's just not interested. He sees me, he knows I'm a woman, but he doesn't seem to care, or else he's very stupid about suggestions. That's possible. If he's part of a were-lion family, he wouldn't mate with human beings? Durley laughed, and it sounded like silver coins falling. No, he thought, she wouldn't have had trouble seducing a young man, or anything male. I gave her no trouble, even now, knowing the truth. Our host isn't a were-lion, she said. Lions eat red meat. We've brought red meat to his table, but he was eating fish. Lions don't lust for a varied diet, and they aren't particular about what they eat. Our host has exquisite taste. If I'd known how fine a cook he is, I'd have come for that alone. He shows some other signs. The whole family's big, but he's a lot bigger. Why does he shave his face and clip his hair short? Is it to hide a mane? Does it matter if they're lions? We don't want to be caught, Durley said. Any one of them is big enough to be a threat. Stop fondling that canapé sticker, dear. On this trip, we use stealth and magic. Oddly reluctant, Karskin said, Speaking of magic. Yes, it's time.
You're quite right. They're hiding something, Lion said absently.
He was carving the meat from a quarter of ox and cutting it into chunks briskly, apparently risking his fingers at every stroke.
What of it? Don't we all have something to hide? They are my guests. They appreciate my food.
Well, said his wife, don't we all have something worth gossiping about? And for a honeymooning couple. At which point Estrail burst into a peal of laughter. Arilta asked, Now what brought that on? But Estrail only shook her head and bent over the pale yellow roots she was cutting. Arilta turned back to her husband. They don't seem loving enough somehow, and she's so beautiful, too.
It makes a pattern, Lion said. The woman is beautiful, as you noticed. She is the Duchess's lady-in-waiting. The man serves the Duke. Could Lady Durley be the Duke's mistress? Might the Duke have married her to one of his men? It would provide for her if she's pregnant. It might keep the Duchess happy. It happens.
Arilta said, Ah. She began dumping double handfuls of meat into a pot. Estrail added the chopped root.
On the other hand, Lion said, she is of the old Minterel aristocracy. Karskin may be too... half, anyway. Perhaps they're not welcome near Bish because of some failed plot. The people around here are of the old Minterel blood. They'd protect them if it came to that.
Well, his wife said with some irritation, which is it? Lion teased her with a third choice.
They spend money freely. Where does it come from? They could be involved in a theft we will presently hear about.
Estrail looked up from cutting onions, tears dripping past a mischievous smile. Listen for word of a large cat's-eye emerald. Estrail, you will explain that, said her mother. Estrail hesitated, but her father's hands had stopped moving, and he was looking up. It was after supper, she said. I was turning down the beds. Karskin found me. We talked a bit, and then he, well, made advances. Poor little man, he weighs less than I do. I slapped him hard enough to knock that lovely patch right off his face. Then I informed him that if he's interested in marriage, he should be talking to my father, and in any case, there are problems he should be aware of. Her eyes were dancing. I must say he took it well. He asked about my dowry. I hinted at undersea treasures. When I said we'd have to live here, he said at least he'd never have to worry about the cooking. But his religion permitted him only one wife, and I said, what a pity.
The jewel,
Lion reminded her. Oh, it's beautiful, deep green with a blazing vertical line, just like a cat's eye. He wears it in the socket of his right eye. Arilta considered. If he thinks that's a safe place to hide it, he should get another patch. Someone might steal that silver thing.
Whatever their secret, it's unlikely to disturb us, Lion said. And this is their old seat of royalty, even the ghost. Which reminds me, Jarper?
He spoke to empty air, and it remained empty.
I haven't seen Jarper since lunch. Is anyone?
Nobody answered. Lion continued.
He was behind Karskin at lunch. Karskin must have something magical on him. Maybe the jewel. Ah, never mind. Jarper can take care of himself. I was saying he probably won't bother our guests. He's of old Mintrel blood himself, if he had blood.
They stuffed wool around the door and windows. They propped a chair under the doorknob. Karskin and Durley had no intention of being disturbed at this point. An innkeeper who found his guests marking patterns on the floor with powdered bone and heating almost fresh blood over a small flame could rightly be expected to show annoyance. Durley spoke in a language once common to the Sorcerers' Guild, now common to nobody. The words seemed to hurt her throat, and no wonder, Karskin thought. He had doffed his silver eye patch. He tended the flame and the pot of blood and stayed near Durley as instructed. He closed his good eye and saw green-tinged darkness. Something darker drifted past, slowly, something huge and rounded that suddenly vanished with a flick of finny tail. Now a drifting current of luminescence, congealing somehow to a vaguely human shape. The night he robbed the jewel merchant's shop, this sight had almost killed him. The movement had wealth to buy the emerald, but Durley swore that the Toravan lords must not learn that the jewel existed. She hadn't told him why. It wasn't for the movement that he had obeyed her. The movement would destroy the Toravan invaders, would punish his father and his half-brothers for their arrogance, for the way they had treated him, for his eye. But he had obeyed her. He was her slave in those days, the slave of his lust for the Lady Durley, his father's mistress. He had guessed that it was glamour that held him, magic. It hadn't seemed to matter. He had invaded the jeweler's shop expecting to die, and it hadn't mattered. The merchant had heard some sound and come to investigate. Karskin had already scooped up everything of value he could find to distract attention from the single missing stone. Waiting for discovery in the dark cellar, he had pushed the jewel into his empty eye socket. Greenish darkness, drifting motion, a sudden flicker that might be a fish's tail. Karskin was seeing with his missing eye. The jeweler had found him while he was distracted, but Karskin had killed him after all. Afterward, knowing that much, he had forced Durley to tell the rest. She had lost a good deal of her power over him. He had outgrown his terror of that greenish dark place. He had seen it every night while he waited for sleep these past 2 years. Karskin opened his good eye to find that they had company. The color of fading fog, it took the wavering form of a wiry old man garbed for war, with his helmet tucked under his arm. "I want to speak to King Nihilel," Durley said. "Fetch him."
"Your pardon, lady."
The voice was less than a whisper, clearer than a memory.
"I can't leave here."
"Who were you?" The fog wisp straightened to attention.
"Sergeant Jarper Sleen, serving Mintrel and the king. I was on duty in the watchtower when the land thrashed like an island fish submerging. The wall broke my arm and some ribs. After things got quiet again, There were only these 3 floors left and no food anywhere. I starved to death.
Durley examined him with a critical eye. You seem nicely solid after 76 years. The ghost smiled.
That's the lion's doing. He lets me take the smells of his cooking as offerings, but I can't leave where I'd died.
Was the king home that day?
Lady, I have to say he was. The quake came fast. I don't doubt that he drowned in his throne room.
Drowned, Durley said thoughtfully. All right. She poured a small flask of seawater into the blood, which was now bubbling. Something must have been added to keep it from clotting. She spoke high and fast in the sorcerer's guild tongue. The ghost of Jarper Sleen sank to its knees. Karskin saw the draperies wavering as if heated air was moving there, and when he realized what that meant, he knelt too. An unimaginative man would have seen nothing. This ghost was more imagination than substance. In fact, the foggy crown had more definition, more reality than the head beneath. Its voice was very much like a memory surfacing from the past, not even Karskin's past, but Durley's.
You have dared to waken Mintrel's king.
76 years after the loss of Atlantis and the almost incidental drowning of the seat of government of Mintrel, the ghost of Mintrel's king seemed harmless enough, but Durley's voice quavered.
You knew me. Durley. Lady Tanilla of Bish was my mother.
Durley, you've grown, said the ghost. Well, what do you want of me?
The barbarians of Torov have invaded Mintrel.
Have you ever been tired unto death, when the pain in an old wound keeps you awake none the less? Well, tell me of these invaders. If you can lure them here, I and my army will pull them under the water.
Karskin thought that Mintrel's ancient king couldn't have drowned a bumblebee. Again, he kept silent while Durley said,
They invaded the year after the Great Quake. They have ruled Mintrel for 74 years. The palace is drowned but for these top floors.
Durley's voice became a whip.
They are used as an inn. Rabbits and chickens are kept where the fighting birds roosted.
The Ghost King's voice grew stronger.
Why was I not told?
This time Karskin spoke. We can't lure them here to a drowned island. We must fight them where they rule, in Bish.
And who are you?
I am Karskin Lor, your majesty. My mother was of Bish. My father, a Toravin calling himself a lord, Chamel of Kanth. Lord Chamel raised me to be his librarian. His legitimate sons, he... Karskin fell silent.
You're a bastard.
Yes.
But you would strike against the Toravin invaders. How?
Durley seemed minded to let him speak. Karskin lifted the silver eye patch to show the great green gem. There were 2 of these, weren't there?
Yes.
Durley tells me they were used for spying. The king said,
That was the traveling stone. Usually I had it mounted in a ring. If I thought a lord needed watching, I made him a present of it. If he was innocent, I made him another present and took it back.
Karskin heaved a shuddering sigh. He had almost believed. Always he had almost believed. Durley asked,
Where was the other stone?
Did your mother tell you of my secret suite, for times when I wanted company away from the queen? It was a very badly kept secret. Many ladies could describe that room. Your mother was one.
Yes.
The ghost smiled. But it stood empty most of the time except for the man on watch in the bathing chamber. There is a statue of the one-eyed god in the bathing chamber, and its eye is a cat's eye emerald. Drurley nodded. "Can you guide us there?" "I can. Can you breathe underwater?" Drurley smiled. "Yes." "The gem holds mana. If it leaves Mintrel Castle, the ghosts will fade." Drurley lost her smile. "King Nihilel—" "I will show you. Duty runs two ways between a king and his subjects." "Now?" "A day or two. We'll have to reach the stairwell past the innkeeper's family." The ghost went where ghosts go. Karskin and Drurley pulled the wool loose from the windows and opened them wide. A brisk sea wind whipped away the smell of scorched blood. "I wish we could have done this on the roof," she said viciously, "among Lion's damned chickens. Use their blood." It happened the second day after their arrival. Karskin was expecting it. The dining room was jammed before noon. Lion's huge pot of stew dwindled almost to nothing. He set his older children to frying thick steaks with black pepper and cream and essence of wine, his younger children to serving. Providentially, Merle showed up, and Lion set him to moving tables and chairs to the roof. The younger children set the extra tables. Karskin and Drurley found themselves squeezing through a host of seamen to reach the roof. Lion laughed as he apologized. "But after all, it's your own doing. I have red meat. Usually there's nothing but fish and shellfish. What do you prefer? My stew has evaporated. Poof! But I can offer," Drurley asked. "Is there still fish?" Lion nodded happily and vanished. Cages of rabbits and pigeons and large bewildered-looking moas had been clustered in the center of the roof to give the diners a sea view. A salvo of torpedoes shot from the sea, bottle-nosed mammals with a laughing expression. They acted like they were trying to get someone's attention. Merle, carrying a table and chairs, said, "Mer people, they must be lost. Where the magic's been used up, they lose their half-human shape and their sense, too. If they're still around when I put out, I'll lead them out to sea." Lion served them himself, but didn't join them. Today he was too busy. Under a brilliant blue sky, they ate island fish baked with slivered nuts and some kind of liqueur and vegetables treated with respect. They ate quickly. Butterflies fluttered in Karskin's belly, but he was jubilant. The lion had red meat. Of course the attic was jammed. Of course the lion and his family were busy as a fallen hive. The third floor would be entirely deserted. Water, black and stagnant, covered the 6th step down. Drurley stopped before she reached it. "Come closer," she said. "Stay close to me." Karskin's protective urge responded to her fear and her beauty. But he reminded himself, it wasn't his nearness she needed. It was the gem. He moved down to join Drurley and her ally. She arrayed her equipment on the steps. No blood this time. King Nihilel was already with them, barely, like an intrusive memory at her side. She began to chant in the Sorcerer's Guild tongue. The water sank, step by step. What had been done 70-odd years ago could be undone partially, temporarily. Drurley's voice grew deep and rusty. Karskin watched as her hair faded from golden to white, as the curves of her body drooped. Wrinkles formed on her face, her neck, her arms. Glamour is a lesser magic, but it takes mana. The magic that was Drurley's youth was being used to move seawater now. Karskin had thought he was ready for this. Now he found himself staring, flinching back, until Drurley, without interrupting herself, snarled, teeth brown or missing, and gestured him down. He descended the wet stone stairs. Drurley followed, moving stiffly. King Nihilil floated ahead of them like foxfire on the water. The sea had left the upper floors, but water still sluiced from the landings. Karsken's torch illuminated dripping walls, and once a stranded fish. Within his chest his heart was fighting for its freedom. On the 5th floor down, there were side corridors. Karsken, peering into their darkness, shied violently from a glimpse of motion. It was an eel flopping as it drowned in air. 8th floor down. Behind him, Drurley moved as if her joints hurt. Her appearance repelled him. The deep lines in her face weren't smile wrinkles, they were selfishness, sulks, rage. And her voice ran on, and her hands danced in creaky curves. She can't hurry, she'd fall. Can't leave her behind. Her spell's my jewel. Keep them together, or... But the ghost was drawing ahead of them. Would he leave us? Here? Worse, Nihilil was becoming hard to see, blurring. The whole corridor seemed filled with the restless fog that was the king's ghost. No, the king's ghost had multiplied. A horde of irritated or curious ghosts had joined the procession. Karsken shivered from the cold and wondered how much the cold was due to ghosts rubbing up against him. 10th floor down, and the procession had become a crowd. Karsken, trailing, could no longer pick out the king, but the ghosts streamed out of the stairwell, flowed away down a corridor, and Karsken followed. A murmuring was in the air, barely audible, 100 ghosts whispering gibberish in his ear. The sea had not retreated from the walls and ceiling there. Water surrounded them ankle-deep as they walked, rounding up the corridor walls and curving over their heads to form a huge, complex bubble. Carpet disintegrated under his boots. To his right, the wall ended. Karsken looked over a stone railing down into the water, into a drowned ballroom. There were bones at the bottom, and swamp fires forming on the water's surface. More ghosts. The ghosts had paused. Now they were like a swirling, continuous, glowing fog. Here and there the motion suggested features, and Karsken suddenly realized that he was watching a riot, ghost against ghost. They'd realized why he was here. Drowning the intruders would save the jewel, save their fading lives. Karsken nerved himself and waded into them. Hands tried to clutch him. A broadsword shape struck his throat and broke into mist. He was through them, standing before a heavy, ornately carved door. The king's ghost was waiting. Silently, he showed Karsken how to manipulate a complex lock. Presently, he mimed turning a brass knob and threw his weight back. Karsken imitated him. The door swung open. A bedchamber, and a canopied bed like a throne. If this place was a ruse, Nihilil must have acted his part with verve. The sea was here, pushing in against the bubble. Karsken could see a bewildered school of minnows in a corner of the chamber. The leader took a wrong turn, and the whole school whipped around to follow him, through the water interface and suddenly into the air. They flopped as they fell, splashed into more water, and scattered. A bead of sweat ran down Drurley's cheek. The king's ghost waited patiently at another door. Terror was swelling in Karsken's throat. Fighting fear with self-directed rage, he strode soggily to the door and threw it open before the king's warning gesture could register. He was looking at a loaded crossbow aimed throat-high. The string had rotted and snapped. Karsken remembered to breathe, forced himself to breathe. It was a tiled bathroom, sure enough. There was a considerable array of erotic statuary, some quite good. The Rose Kati statue would have been better for less detail, Karsken thought. A skeleton in the pool wore a rotting bath attendant's kilt. That would be Nihilil's spy. the one-eyed god in a corner. Yes. The eye not covered by a patch gleamed even in this dim, watery light, gleamed green with a bright, vertical pupil. Karsken closed his good eye and found himself looking at himself. Grinning, eye closed, he moved toward the statue, fumbling in his pouch for the chisel. Odd to see himself coming toward himself like this. And drearily behind him, the triumph beginning to show through the exhaustion. And behind her? He drew his sword as he spun. Drearily froze in shock as he seemed to leap at her. The bubble of water trembled, the sea began to flow down the walls before she recovered herself. But by then Karsken was past her, and trying to skewer the intruder who danced back, laughing through the bedroom and through its ornate door, while Karsken checked himself. The emerald in his eye socket was supplying the mana to run the spell that held back the water. It had to stay near Drearily. She drilled him on this, over and over, until he could recite it in his sleep. Lion stood in the doorway, comfortably out of reach. He threw his arms wide, careless of the big, broad-bladed kitchen knife in one hand, and said, "But what a place to spend a honeymoon!" "Tastes differ," Karsken said. "Innkeeper, this is none of your business."
"There is a thing of power down here. I've known that for a long time. You're here for it, aren't you?"
"The spying stone," Karsken said. "You don't even know what it is."
"Whatever it is, I'm afraid you can't have it," Lion said. "Perhaps you haven't considered the implications."
"Oh, but I have. We'll sell the traveling stone to the barbarian king in Bish. From that moment on, the movement will know everything he does."
"Can you think of any reason why I should care?"
Karsken made a sound of disgust. "So you support the Torvins?"
"I support nobody. Am I a lord or a soldier? No. I feed people. If someone should supplant the Torvins, I will feed the new conquerors. I don't care who is at the top."
"We care."
"Oh, you, because you haven't the rank of your half-brothers? The elderly Lady Drearily who wants vengeance on her enemies' grandchildren? Or the ghosts? It was a ghost who told me you were down here."
Beyond Lion, Karsken watched faintly luminous fog swirling in the corridor. The war of ghosts continued, and Drearily was tiring. He couldn't stay here. He had to pry out the jewel. "Is it the jewel you want?" "You couldn't have reached it without Drearily's magic. If you distract her now, you'll never reach the air with or without the jewel. We'll all drown." Karsken kept his sword's point at eye level. If Lion was a were-lion. But he didn't eat red meat.
"The jewel has to stay," Lion said. "Why do you think these walls are still standing?"
Karsken didn't answer.
"The quake that sank Atlantis, the quake that put this entire peninsula under water. Wouldn't it have shaken down stone walls? But this palace dates from the Sorcerer's Guild period. Magic spells were failing, but not always. The masons built this palace of good, solid stone. Then they had the structure blessed by a competent magician."
"Oh."
"Yes, the walls would have been shaken down without the blessing and some source of mana to power it. You see the problem. Remove the talisman, the castle crumbles."
He might be right, Karsken thought. But not until both emeralds were gone, and Karsken too. Lion was still out of reach. He didn't handle that kitchen knife like a swordsman, and in any case it was too short to be effective. At a dead run, Karsken thought he could catch the beefy chef. But what of Drearily, and the spell that held back the water? Fool! She had the other jewel! He charged. Lion whirled and ran down the hall. The ghost fog swirled apart as he burst through. He was faster than he looked. But Karsken was faster still. His sword was nearly pricking Lion's buttocks when Lion suddenly leapt over the banister. Karsken leaned over the dark water. The ghosts crowded around him were his only light source now. Lion surfaced 30 feet above the ballroom floor and well out into the water, laughing.
"Well, my guest, can you swim? Many mainlanders can't."
Karskin removed his boots. He might wait, let Lion tire himself treading water. But Durley must be tiring even faster and growing panicky as she wondered where he had gone. He couldn't leave Lion at their backs. He didn't dive. He lowered himself carefully into the water, then swam toward Lion. Lion backstroked, grinning. Karskin followed. He was a fine swimmer. Lion was swimming backward into a corner of the ballroom, trapping himself. The water surface rose behind him, curving up the wall. Could Lion swim uphill? Lion didn't try. He dove. Karskin dove after him, kicking, peering down. There were patches of luminosity, confusing, and a dark shape far below, darting away at a speed Karskin couldn't hope to match. Appalled, Karskin lunged to the surface, blinked, and saw Lion clamber over the railing. He threw Karskin's boots at his head and dashed back toward the king's secret bedroom. The old woman was still waiting, with the king's ghost for her companion. Lion tapped her shoulder. He said, "Boo!" She froze, then tottered creakily around to face him.
"Where is Karskin?" "In the ballroom."
Water was flowing down the walls, knee-high and rising. Lion was smiling as at a secret joke, as he'd smiled while watching her savor her first bite of his incredible swordfish. It meant something different now. Durley said,
"Very well, you killed him. Now, if you want to live, get me that jewel and I will resume the spells. If our plans succeed, I can offer Karskin's place in the new nobility to you or your son. Otherwise, we both drown."
"Karskin could tell you why I refuse. I need the magic in the jewel to maintain my inn. With the jewel Karskin brought me, this structure will remain stable for many years."
Lion didn't seem to notice that the king's ghost was clawing at his eyes. The water was chest-high.
"Both jewels, or we don't leave,"
the old woman said, and immediately resumed her spell, hands waving wildly, voice raspy with effort. She felt Lion's hands on her body and squeaked in outrage, then in terror, as she realized he was tickling her. Then she doubled in helpless laughter. The water walls were collapsing, flowing down. The odd magical bubble was collapsing around him. Clawing at the stone banister, Karskin heard his air supply roaring back up the stairwell. Out through the broken windows away. A wave threw him over the banister, and he tried to find his footing, but already it was too deep. Then the air was only a few silver patches on the ceiling, and the sea wash was turning him over and over. A big dark shape brushed past him, fantastically agile in the roiling currents, gone before his sword arm could react. Lion had escaped him. He swam toward one of the smashed ballroom windows, knowing he wouldn't make it, trying anyway. The faint glow ahead might be King Nihilil guiding him. Then it all seemed to fade, and he was breathing water, strangling. Lion pulled himself over the top step, his flippers already altering to hands. He was gasping, blowing. It was a long trip, even for a sea lion. The returning sea had surged up the steps and sloshed along the walls and into the rooms where Lion and his family dwelt. Lion shook his head. For a few days they must needs occupy the next level up, the inn, which was now empty. The change to human form was not so great a change for Lion. He became aware of one last wisp of fog standing beside him.
"Well," it said, "how's the king?"
"Furious," Lion said. "But after all, what can he do? I thank you for the warning."
"I'm glad you could stop them. My curse on their crazy rebellion. We'll all fade away in time, I guess, with the magic dwindling and dwindling. But not just yet, if you please."
"War is bad for everyone," said Lion.